Hey, what's going on out there? I'm Sean Devine. Hope you all are doing well. Today's tutorial, we're going to unpack a loaded topic, which is gain staging. I get a lot of questions about it. There's some things that you all are over stressing about that were much more applicable to a previous era, much more in the analog realm. Once we're in the DAW, things are working quite a bit differently, and I'm going to demonstrate this for you all. Very quickly before we dive into the thick of this, if you have no idea what gain staging is, it is just simply optimizing the gain or the level of our audio throughout the entire signal flow, right? So you've got a gain stage here just with my preamp, amplifying the microphone. Then that may go into, say, a hardware compressor. You've got an input there, and we're optimizing these to avoid any unwanted distortion or noise, so a noise floor, or an artifact. If I just play back this beat, we don't have any clipping, even on the stereo bus. I do have the limiter off right now, but just seeing that we have healthy signals here. All right, so you guys with me here? This is where it gets interesting. We've got the kick, and I want you to listen very closely. This is just with the headroom in the mix. So let's say that I was pushing this a little hotter. We're going to clip the channel a little bit, so we'll bring this up to about 4 dB. All right, so clipping both the individual track as well as the stereo bus, and we're not introducing any distortion, anything undesired there. But if we are to bounce this or export it to a wave, this is where the problems come. So if I export this, I'm going to go ahead and just do 16-bit wave, and we'll call this kick clip, original kick. And the kick exported clipping. That is digital distortion. So we need to understand that when we're in the DAW, we're dealing with what's called 32-bit or 64-bit floating point processing. So you don't have to understand that on a scientific level, but what it means is, on the DAW level, as far as our mixer and just processing audio outside of the plugins, we have an insane amount of headroom that is not going to be dealt with like an analog fixed point processing, like we would clip at 0, that sort of thing. It's very different. The floating point processing actually gives us a lot of flexibility here in terms of how we're routing all these signals. If we go back to that kick, put it back up at 4, and then we route this to a bus, like let's say we were going to set up a drum bus. So we're going to route the entire output down there to this bus. Same thing, right? So we're clipping the bus as well as the output. If I bring the bus down to our original level, right, which would have been, what, it was at -6, so -10. So we're clipping the individual channel, but now we've adjusted the bus, no clipping there, and then of course no clipping on the stereo bus. So if we bounce that now, let's see what happens. So we'll call this kick clip bus. And the original kick. All right, so we had clipping on the individual channel, but as soon as we routed it to a bus, adjusted that, we made it out and we don't have any distortion. So just to show you, by utilizing buses and routing things this way, we can avoid any issues. So the floating point processing, again, it can be a really helpful thing, especially, realizing that all clipping on an individual track is not necessarily a problem as long as it's dealt with at some point. Now, if you're in the DAW and you don't necessarily know if that track that's clipping is causing a problem and you don't necessarily want to export it and you just want to check it, there is a codec preview tool in Ozone that's very useful for this purpose. So I'm going to turn off the maximizer, turn on Ozone, and click this codec tab. And if we go to, say 320 MP3, something like that, we turn that on, and then we solo this. So there we can go ahead and hear what that conversion is going to do. Obviously, we can hear that we're getting digital distortion caused by that kick clipping the stereo bus. The other really important aspect of gain staging that I want to cover today is at the plugin level. So that meaning a plugin as an insert or on an aux or on the stereo bus, the input levels that we're feeding into plugins. Now, the reason this is misleading is because not all plugins treat input levels the same. Some plugins, like this one, are built to replicate their hardware predecessor. And so when we start to feed it at a certain input level, it'll introduce distortion or saturation characteristics, but not all plugins do that. Some of the more modern plugins are not going to treat the input level the same. So trying to feed every plugin at a numeric value like -18 dBFS is not necessarily good practice or the best practice, and definitely not necessary because we have a very subjective way of dealing with input levels on the plugins. What you should do is listen. Use your ears when you're utilizing these plugins. You will hear the way that these change the tone right here in the DAW if there's something introduced. And if there is, there's some ways that we can adjust our input, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. Even though we have headroom right here, this meter is going to be clipping in this plugin. But it's not distorting right here. So let's export this, and we'll call this kick clip plugin. So the original and the kick with the plugin clipping, they're identical. Even though a plugin might indicate that you're clipping, it's not necessarily going to be an issue, and that's why it's important to listen. But let's say that a plugin did start to introduce some artifacts or some distortion that was undesired, that you did not want. We would want to adjust the input level. Now, right now, if I change the level on the mixer, it's not going to change what's going into the plugin. Logic specifically doesn't have what's called pre-insert gain processing, but we can do the same thing a number of ways. One of them would be to just utilize the gain plugin. So put the gain plugin first in your chain, and we'll just turn down the gain here on the gain plugin. And you can adjust that so that your plugin can optimally process that. The other way is to just utilize our region gain, which in other DAWs is called different things. But if we're in audio, we can just click that and go up here to the gain and just turn that down, and that will also affect the input level, and we can adjust it that way. I just put up a tutorial where I was balancing and leveling a beat from scratch. I'll put a link to it if you want to check it out, but many of you had questions about the gain staging there and why I didn't focus on that. And it's because there's a couple of things that we can do once we get the balance right and we get the most of our loudness and just the sound that we want. We can do after the fact to where we create headroom and we don't have to worry about introducing, the digital distortion, some of the problems that can happen after we get out of the DAW. One of those is to utilize a VCA or your master fader to just bring everything back after you've got the level right. So this is the original mix. This is how I mixed it. And if I play that back, got no clipping on the individual tracks. Everything sounds the way I want it to, but we're clipping a little bit on the stereo bus. And once I get to mastering processing, I'm going to want a little bit of headroom there. So all I have to do is just set up a VCA and I can just bring that back. By approaching it this way, I was able to focus on the leveling and the balance and really being creative and not worrying about gain staging so much, and then just do this after the fact so that I can create that headroom that I need. The other thing that I do is I mix into a limiter. So you guys have seen this on a lot of my videos, but I will just set a limiter to, like -1 and then just mix into it. Now, the reason for this is because you're going to start to hear the same way that we're having, you know, some of that digital distortion happening, you're going to hear the way the limiter is reacting when we have this fixed point, you know, -1 dB true peak. When things start to hit that, if your kick, for instance, is mixed too loud and it's affecting this a certain way, we can go in and make some adjustments, you know, turn down the kick, and we're going to be able to know what that is going to do. All right, y'all, so deep breath. I know that was a loaded topic, but I hope that we covered some things that clarify the topic of gain staging for you, and also just make sure that you're not over stressing about some of these aspects that just don't matter as much in the DAW anymore. I don't want you to get so focused on the visual aspects, the numerical values of gain staging, that becomes more important than the mix itself. You know, get in here, push some faders, have fun, do what sounds best. Use your creative intuition. Let gain staging be a guide for you so that you're not reckless with levels, but don't let it be the most important thing in your entire process, because I can promise you, you're not going to get the results you want if you are distracted by all of these visual indicators and numbers that are thrown out that may or may not be the best thing for your song. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions or concerns about gain staging, we would love to hear your input in the comments below. Love interacting with you guys, so stay in touch with me. If you learn anything in the video, please like, subscribe, and consider sharing. We'll talk to you soon.